Dosan. All right, this is a video lecture. I will try to make it about as short as I can for week 11 or lesson 11 for GFVM 1036, both sections 1 and section 2. As I go, I will adjust the notes on the Google document for, well, one of these two units, and then if my brain holds up, I will select everything, copy and paste so that you both have the full set of notes. I hope those of you in GFVM section, GFVM 1036 section 2, took the time to watch the video on Mencius and the Great Learning. I've rarely had an opportunity to say something that seemed so timely while talking about philosophy. All right, what are we doing now, though? We're doing something a bit different now. We're doing Taoism and Buddhism. What are we going for here? What are we really aiming for? We're aiming for a working understanding of two prominent Eastern perspectives on happiness to supplement what we already have for Confucianism, and to have a bigger picture, since we also have those Western conceptions of happiness plus the insights from economics and from psychology that we looked at the beginning of the semester. So let's do this somewhat quickly, somewhat briefly. Taoism and Buddhism, honestly, I'm not an expert here. I can give you a few insights maybe and a rough understanding of some of the basics, starting with this review of what probably most of you already know about Taoism. This is an ancient religious and philosophical tradition originating in China. The tradition says Lao Tzu is the founder, the old master. The central text is the Daodejing. Now, Taoism emphasizes, obviously, the Tao, and this is not quite the same as the Tao in Confucianism, though there are certain parallels. The Tao is the way, and in Taoism, the Tao is the ultimate reality. It is the source of all things. It is also the pattern by which we should live. It is the way. Taoism strives to bring your life, my life, the life of the individual human being, in line with the Tao, but also the life of society. This is like, according to my understanding of Confucianism and so many other traditions, this is something for society. This is a social and political philosophy. This is also a teaching for the individual. This is meant for you. It's meant for me. It's also meant for the whole of society. It's meant for, well, everyone over there in Shatin Valley. It's meant for more than Shatin Valley. It's meant for the whole city. It's meant for the whole world, in fact. The Taoist philosophy is multifaceted. So, how do we get ourselves in line with the Tao? How do we get society in line with the Tao? We're not going to look at this in any kind of thoroughness here. We're going to get a brief look at this one particular text, the Daodejing, as an introduction to Taoist ethics. And we're not studying the broader Taoist tradition here. We're not studying Lao Tzu as a historical character. We're just studying this particular text as an introduction. Now, what is this text? What is it about? Edward Ryden, a scholar who worked on the Oxford World Classics edition, in his introduction, he lists some conventional interpretations of the Daodejing. He says one theory is that it's essentially a book about statecraft and government. And another theory emphasizes the individual. It's the theory that this is essentially a book about promoting virtue in yourself. It's a book about that thing that we talked about in Confucianism, major theme in Chinese philosophy, self-cultivation. Major theme in Aristotelian ethics, self-cultivation. Cultivating good character in yourself, cultivating the right habits, the right disposition to life. It's primarily interested in self-cultivation. There are ancient commentaries that see this text as a text of self-cultivation with an emphasis on reducing desires and creating harmony and longevity in your own life. But also, even in this interpretation, in the state, there's always a connection between city and soul, as we have in Plato's Republic. There's always a connection between the individual and society. So Ryden suggests his own interpretation, that the book can be seen primarily as a kind of pedagogical tool or mnemonic device that would have been used as a starting point in discussion or practice between a master and a pupil. So maybe it's a book about statecraft. It's a book of political philosophy. It's a book about government. Maybe it's about self-cultivation. It's about virtue and cultivating the right disposition towards life and the right set of habits for you, for me, for the individual. Or maybe this book is really a book for Taoist education, for a master and a pupil to talk about. The cryptic sayings in the text, the clever sayings, the insightful sayings, but sometimes the confusing sayings are meant as a starting point for discussion, and the master and the pupil will talk about what this book means together. I am a great optimist about this as well as various other things. I think this book is meant to have all of these purposes myself. I think it's meant to have multiple purposes. It's meant as these things. It's also meant as a book of metaphysical reflection on the nature of reality. Wright-in also points to ancient commentaries that treat this book as a book of philosophical speculation and that consider the Tao a transcendent reality, the ultimate being, or in fact the ultimate non-being, because probably if I can draw from Western accounts of mysticism that I think are probably hitting on the same general idea, the ultimate non-being, because it's beyond our categories of being. Not that it doesn't exist or anything like that. If you say Batman is a non-being because he's not real, sure, that's fine. That's not what the Tao is. The Tao is a non-being because it's beyond our categories of being. We have an idea of what being is. The Tao is beyond that. Jean-Luc Marion, French Catholic philosopher, draws from postmodern philosophers, draws from Nietzsche and Heidegger, but he's also Catholic. He's drawing from people like St. Augustine. And as far as I can tell, he's a pretty orthodox thinker in the Christian tradition. And his book is called, well, one of his books, God Without Being. Does that mean God doesn't exist? No, it means God's essence is beyond our ability to understand, and we think of the being of this or whatever you call it, this phone chargey cord thingy, and this phone chargey cord thingy, and this teacup. They all have being. Well, it's more of a gigantic tea mug or tumbler. Tumbler is the word we use in the West these days. I don't have the foggiest idea. Thermos, I think. We used to call it thermos when I was young. Now it's called a tumbler. Thermoses, tumblers, chargers, papers, backpacks, glasses exist. They have being. But our category of being, our idea of being here, our idea of the existence of all these different objects, is an idea of being that doesn't capture the essence of God or the essence of the Tao. I think that's the insight, or the theory anyway, that's behind a lot of mystical speculations. So the Tao is focused on philosophical speculation. Daoism is focused on philosophical speculations. This book considers the Tao as radically transcendent, the ultimate non-being, the first cause in these senses, according to one speculation Wright-in points to from ancient commentaries. And I think this is also an aspect of the text. So it's a work of political theory. It's a work of personal cultivation. And it's a philosophical, mystical speculation. Also, speaking of mysticism, not just philosophical, but it's a religious work, a work of religious mysticism. And it's a sort of primer on how we might ascend to knowledge of ultimate reality. I think all of these interpretations of the text are plausible. Frankly, I subscribe to all of them, and I think they fit together. The individual and the community are connected. The philosophical speculations on reality, the religious speculations, and the account on how we might the primer on how we might ascend, the guidance on how we might ascend to knowledge of ultimate reality, plus the reflections and conversations between student and master. These are all connected. And the life of the individual, the life of the community are not only linked to each other, but they're built on reality, and the proper understanding of how to straighten out our own lives and the life of society is built on a proper understanding of reality itself. So all of these things are connected. The person who is ascended through knowledge of the Tao ought to be the person best able to reform society and to reform his own life. I think there are all these plausible, likely connections. Now, what does Daoism actually teach? I think we can summarize a whole lot of Daoism in 3 principles. First principle is mysticism. Second principle, naturalism. Third principle, success by inaction. Now, there's a word here, pardon my ignorance, I don't think I've learned the Guangdonghua pronunciation. I believe Wu Wei is, well, actually, Wu Wei is probably the anglicized pronunciation of the Mandarin, of the Putonghua. So pardon me if my pronunciation is way off. Wu Wei is a word for inaction. It actually turns up in the Analects. I've given both units now, I believe, this chart. How many laws and how many laws does society need? How harsh should punishments be for breaking the laws? And if you think we need a lot of laws and harsh punishments, or no laws and no punishments, there's a long continuum between these two positions. And let's see, was this side? I think this side is lots of laws, harsh punishments. This side is no laws, no punishments. Taoism is on this side. I don't think it's as simple as saying it's all the way over here, but it's on this side of things. Confucianism, I understand it, is somewhere in the middle. Legalism is actually on that side. And Confucianism is not saying, go all the way over here, no laws, no punishments. It's saying, move this direction. We need fewer laws, fewer punishments. The best government operates by ritual, by virtue, by ren, yan, not primarily by laws and punishments. And we have this magnificent articulation of these matters in Mencius. The Taoist approach is further that way, if I understand it correctly. And this term, Wu Wei, for inaction, actually turns up at least once in the Analects of Confucius in a similar context. Now, this obviously has something to do with government and philosophy of society, social and political philosophy. More on that in a little bit. This should turn up in our notes in a moment. What shall I say about naturalism and mysticism? I think I'll say nothing at all about mysticism at this time. Naturalism. Naturalism, what does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean go away from the city, leave the skyscrapers, leave the cement homes, go and live in the mountains somewhere away from the MTR. I don't think it means that. I don't think it means you can drink tea, but you may never use Panadol. I don't think it means you can't use glasses. I don't think it means returning to nature in that sense. I think it means pursue natural things more than unnatural. That doesn't convey much information for you, does it? It means something like this. Pursue solutions in life and ways of life that work with the flow of nature rather than against it. I'll jot this down in your notes. Pursue strategies in life and solutions to our problems that work with rather than against the natural patterns, the natural flow of life. Or in other words, things that go with the Tao and not against it. Inaction connects to naturalism. Wu Wei connects to naturalism. It is not pure inaction, but minimal and natural action. More on that in a little bit. So I guess maybe I should say something else about what it means. I don't think it means you have to abandon technology and go off and live in a forest somewhere. And I don't think it means you can drink tea, but you're never allowed to take any medicine produced in a factory. It probably means things like you shouldn't take weird medicines that change the way the body works, okay? But a few medicines that help to cure an illness in the body and restore the natural functioning of your body are probably okay. And of course, tea is okay. It means things like don't destroy the natural patterns of the physical environment we live in. Don't cut down all the trees. I don't think it means there's no technology. I have no doubt that some sort of farming technology was available in this time, and that Lao Tzu is probably not opposed to all forms of farming technology. I seriously doubt he had a problem with plows. And I'm not at all convinced he would have a problem with tractors. I can imagine there are certain techniques that, certain possible farming techniques that change the very nature of grain, or that grow strange things. Oh, chickens, this is perfect. I've heard of chickens not even sleeping. Like chickens grown on weird hormones in factories and living for a few days, a few weeks, and kept awake by lights so that the chickens grow fat on strange hormones and grains and never sleep, and then they're slaughtered. I imagine Daoism having a problem with that, but I don't imagine Daoism having a problem with the existence of plows or tractors as such. There's probably such a thing as a natural and appropriate way to use technology to work with the natural patterns of life, rather than to replace them with something we think makes more sense for us. Now let's talk about metaphysics and religion. The sections of the text 1 and 25. Oh, and I'll say, as I've said before, your reading, I believe, is copied and pasted from Legg, because James Legg is the public domain translation. I can copy and paste, and it's an accessible text for all of us. Those of you, I presume most of you, all of you, who have access to the original text, by all means, consult the original text. You don't have to use our public domain English translations. You can use those or newer English translations, or use the original. Fine with me. But in the public domain translation that can be easily legally distributed to students, and it's a common text for everyone, sections 1 and 25 tell us some interesting things. The Tao that can be trodden or walked is not the enduring and unchanging Tao. The name that can be named is not the enduring and unchanging name. Conceived of as having no name, it is the originator of heaven and earth. Conceived of as having a name, it's the mother of all things. Under these two aspects, it is really the same, but as development takes place, it receives the different names. Together we call them the mystery. Where the mystery is the deepest is the gate of all that is subtle and wonderful. There was something undefined and complete coming into existence before heaven and earth. How still it was and formless, standing alone and undergoing no change, reaching everywhere and in no danger of being exhausted. It may be regarded as the mother of all things. I do not know its name, and I give it the designation of the Tao, the way or course. Making an effort to give it a name, I call it the Great. Man takes his law from the earth. The earth takes its law from heaven. Heaven takes its law from the Tao. The law of the Tao is its being what it is. So let me comment on these metaphysical speculations. We cannot give the correct name of the Tao. And in fact, I don't think we can even understand it fully. The Tao is not that kind of reality. The Tao is transcendent. We can know some things about it, but not everything. It is transcendent, pre-exists heaven and earth. It is the source of all things. It is enduring and unchanging. We can name it. These names appear to be somewhat metaphorical. We can call the Tao the mother of all things. If I may again be permitted to make a comparison to more Western accounts that I have some familiarity with. Honestly, if you found the right expert in Hindu accounts, that might be just as useful or more useful, but I do what I can. Thomas Aquinas, Western Christian philosopher, great Catholic theologian in the medieval era, in his Summa Theologica, towards the beginning, talks about names for God. And he says, he asks this question, are names for God univocal or equivocal, or something else? If they're univocal, that means that they are the same. So if I say David is a king and I say God is a king, and if the name king is univocal, then when I say God is a king and when I say David is a king, I mean the same thing. And if it's equivocal, that means that the names mean something totally different. So saying God is a king and saying David is a king means something totally different. But Aquinas' answer is it's analogical. It's somewhere in between. It's more like a metaphor. When we say God is a king, we don't mean God is exactly the same thing as David. And it's not something completely different either. It means God is like King David in some respects. Or better yet, King David is like God in some respects. The kingship of a king is like the nature of God in some respects, but it's not a perfect representation. I think something like this is probably going on here. We can name the Tao, but these names are not literal. They don't capture the essence of the Tao. What they are is metaphors to help us understand what we can. What's that biblical language? We see through a mirror darkly. We don't see the Tao in its essence, and we don't capture its essence with these names. We see as through a mirror darkly, an imperfect reflection of the Tao, an imperfect working understanding of the Tao. And what names do we give it? The Great, the Way, the Mother of all things. We might read section 1 now as telling us that there are two Taos, the ultimate Tao and the other some sort of emanation from it, where we have the Tao that is trodden. It's not the enduring and unchanging Tao. The name that can be named is not the enduring and unchanging name. Two Taos, one we can name, one we can walk, but neither of them is the ultimate Tao. I think it's better to read this passage, which is certainly suggested by the end of the section. Under these two aspects, it is really the same. As development takes place, it receives the different names. It's better to think of this as telling us that there are two ways of thinking about Tao. There's only one Tao, but there's two ways of talking about it. You can talk about it as beyond our ability to name, and you can talk about it as the way we can walk in, the way we can name, but we can't name it perfectly. We name it largely relying on metaphor. Tao is not the name of the ultimate reality. Any more than king is a proper description of God in Christian theology. But the Tao is a darn good metaphor to help us capture. The mother of all things is a darn good metaphor to help us capture the nature of the Tao. And in Christian theology, king is a darn good metaphor to help us understand God. Now, there's also this interesting analysis in section 25. The rules of human behavior are taken from nature. Man takes his law from the earth, we are told. The rules of nature are defined by heaven. The rules of heaven are defined by Tao. The Tao itself is self-defining. How does it go in the Leg translation? The law of the Tao is its being what it is. Again, you can make comparisons and contrasts. Don't overdo them. Don't underdo them. If you have time to think through them, be careful. They're not saying exactly the same thing. The similarities may not be exactly what they appear at first. There may be dramatic differences in the outlook here, but there are certainly connections to be considered carefully between, for example, this and something like in the Torah. God says, when Moses asks him, "Who shall I say is sending me to the Hebrews in Egypt?" He's expecting perhaps, I'm not certain here, but one plausible interpretation is that he's expecting a God who defines himself in familiar terms, because the normal conception of God is the God of the sun, Ra, the Egyptian god of the sun, the god of the river, the god of the mountain, the god of this, the god of that, the god of the harvest. And God doesn't say, "I am this god or that god." He says, "I am what I am," or "I am that I am," or "I will be what I will be." He says, "I am has sent me to you." That's what you should tell the Hebrews in Egypt. God tells Moses, "I am self-defining. You won't define me in these otherwise." Although God will define himself in Scripture by saying things like, "I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." I am the God after Moses. I am the God who brought you guys out of Egypt with Moses and with these mighty acts of redemption and these miracles. God will give us his own way of talking through of thinking of him. God is self-defining, but can give us our own way of understanding him. Don't take your own working understanding of the world and apply it to God carelessly. This is a train of thought that works in Christian theology, or at least it's plausible in Christian theology, and things like this turn up in Western accounts of mysticism, of religion, of philosophy, things like Thomas Aquinas grappling with these questions. There are comparisons here to Daoism. Don't overdo them. Don't underdo them. Be careful with them. Take what you understand, go with it until you learn better. The Tao itself is self-defining, and the universe itself follows the Tao, and so should we. The universe is governed by the Tao, but how does the Tao govern? Well, the Tao is, this may be a good way of working with that metaphor, the mother of all things. The Tao does not actively control the universe. It guides, it governs, or leads. You could almost say it nurtures, rather than sending out a bunch of laws that the universe has to follow. The Tao doesn't say to the sun, well, let's get our astronomy, our cosmology right. The Tao doesn't say to the earth, now go around the sun. The Tao guides, governs, leads, even nurtures, rather than actively controls. At least I think the word nurture may work here. the Tao governs more passively. Now, you can also connect this to this yin-yang distinction in Chinese philosophy. If I understand the situation correctly, let's see. Yang is the masculine, active, heavenly principle. Yin is the feminine, passive, earthly principle. You can think of Confucianism as an effort to follow the Tao, which focuses a little more on Yang, and Daoism as shifting our attentions back towards the Yin, back towards the feminine, passive side of things. Now, this, of course, connects to political philosophy. If you're paying attention, I suppose maybe you're thinking, what? What does it have to do with political philosophy? This is metaphysical mumbo-jumbo. Where's the political philosophy? Oh, there's so much political philosophy. Let's not go directly to it. Well, maybe this is direct. Confucianism has a more active understanding of virtue that involves doing things. The Taoist understanding of virtue is more about not doing things, or at any rate doing less, learning to do, well, to practice Wu Wei, to do what is minimal and natural. The Daodejing has various passages that critique Confucian virtue. Now, actually, there are big questions here. According to at least one ancient account, Confucius actually met Lao Tzu. So are we actually saying that he's critiquing him when he maybe met him once? This is an interesting question. I am not in a position to give you the definitive account, even a properly informed account of the origins of the Daodejing. One possible theory is that, yes, Confucius was known to Lao Tzu and he's responding to Confucius directly. I don't think that's very likely. I think another theory is somewhat more likely, that Lao Tzu, well, we're presuming he existed in the first place. There may be some skeptics who go as far as to deny even that. I don't go that far. I assume he is a historical character. But one theory is he met Confucius. He's critiquing Confucius directly. Another theory is Lao Tzu left some of his followers a tradition and maybe some portions of the Daodejing, maybe most of it, and then it was modified by his followers, and then they added these bits critiquing Confucianism, or maybe they changed the words to point a critique in the direction of Confucianism. I think that theory is a bit more likely. Or another theory, since Confucius himself says, I am a transmitter, not a creator. I'm not inventing accounts of virtue. I'm taking them from ancient tradition. I believe in the ancients. I love the ancients. I look to antiquity for knowledge. I take the ancient account of virtue. I'm trying to rediscover it. Maybe develop an account of it. Maybe add a new understanding of it that wasn't fully clear before. But I'm not inventing anything new here. Maybe Lao Tzu, even if a contemporary of Confucius with no direct influence from Confucius or critique of Confucius, even if that's the case, maybe Lao Tzu is responding to the same thing Confucius is responding to. So whether it's from Lao Tzu directly to Confucius or Lao Tzu directly to the same tradition Confucius is drawing from, that Lao Tzu is instead critiquing, or whether it's from later followers of Lao Tzu critiquing Confucianism, or later followers of Lao Tzu critiquing followers of Confucius. For one or more of these reasons, Taoism critiques Confucianism and says these things the Confucians call virtues actually happened after the Tao was neglected. Now, there may be a sort of partial respect for these things. There may be an idea that this account of virtue, this Confucian account of virtue, is better than nothing, but it's definitely critiqued as insufficient, not good enough. This is the halfway measure. This is the treating of the symptom. If you want to cure the disease underlying the symptom, go back to the Tao. Go back to the Tao. Ritual, Confucian Li, and concepts of virtue, lauded by Confucianism, these are artificial methods of trying to fix behaviors that had gone bad long before. A return to the Tao is better than Confucian virtue, better than ritual. Now, the Tao guides all reality, not by means of power and authority. It presides over all and yet does not control them. Now, we're still trying to talk about ethics and political philosophy. A good ruler, a sage ruler should do this. Quoting from the Legge translation, therefore, the sage manages affairs without doing anything and conveys his instructions without the use of speech. How do you give instructions without speech? Well, that's why the book exists, so you can learn that sort of thing. But if you're a skeptic and you're thinking, oh, come on, give me an explanation here. Don't just tell me, oh, it's a mystery, that's why the book is here. You're supposed to be explaining the mysteries, aren't you, the teacher? If you're having that reaction to me, proceed. I can do a little more than this. I can say it is hard. That is why we have this text. That is no doubt why there were ancient Taoist traditions of reflection working on figuring this out. But I can say a little bit about how to manage affairs without doing anything. Now there is, as I've suggested, this continuum between minimal action, minimal laws, minimal punishments, heavy action, lots of laws, heavy punishments in social and political philosophy, and also in personal philosophy. And Confucianism is sort of pushing us that way, but not all the way. Daoism is maybe all the way, at least further this way than Confucianism as a general rule. This is my working model for understanding some ancient Chinese traditions and philosophy, with legalism over on that side. Okay. On the Taoist side of Confucianism, you find illustrations of how this might work in Mencius and in the Analect. I did this once with students. I wish I could do it more. I noticed that my students in a tutorial one day in a course a couple years ago were not doing what they were supposed to be doing. They were, I think, just sitting, maybe whispering amongst themselves, but they weren't working together on the project I'd assigned to them. So I think to myself, you ought to tell those students to get in line. You ought to give them some instructions with speech. And then I realized, wait a minute, there's another way. You've just been studying it in Confucius. What's the thing Confucius? Ah, yes, ritual, li. Because in the Analects, there's this passage about the king, the noble king, the sage ruler, who conveyed instructions without the use of speech. He just did the ritual, and everyone followed and did what was right. And I asked myself, how do I do that for the students? Should I try that instead of giving them verbal instructions? And I knew what to do, and I did it. I barely remember anything about what I did. I think it was a simple case of just looking at them in just the right way. Actually, it wasn't even, that. It was more like just one glance, maybe a little curiosity about what's going on. I didn't use a word, and it worked perfectly. Whatever this little ritual I did with my eyes was, the students immediately started doing what they were supposed to be doing. This works. Think of the instruction someone gives without words that you understand, The parent telling kids, or, this means come over here. This means go over there. Or this means stop. I don't know how many times I've done this to my kids. And it means, wait just a minute. Stop chattering so much. I'll get back to you when I can. Give me a moment to get the dishwater off of my hands, pause the podcast, and then you can talk. This means wait. You can convey a lot of instructions without speech. Another bit of political philosophy, personal philosophy, ethics is watch your desires. Don't desire money, power, fame. They're not the purpose. Pursuit of money, power, fame makes you exhausted and doesn't accomplish happiness. Here is where Disney movies, again, coincide with philosophy or religion. Disney movies will tell you money is not the purpose of life. And indeed, the ceaseless pursuit of money, power, and fame doesn't actually seem to make us happy. That's a Taoist way of thinking. And this is not just personal advice for you personally. It's political advice. A good government, a sage ruler, should not allow people to see, quote, what is likely to excite their desires, end quote, i.e., what lures people with money and power. A good ruler should rule by doing as little as possible, thus encouraging people to do their own work and to not fight to usurp power. Now, I'm telling you, I don't see how Mencius could have done what he did in the first page of the Mencius unless he'd been studying the Daodejing. I think Mencius is on the Taoist side of Confucian philosophy, and he'd been reading that text. At any rate, maybe there is one way he did it. Maybe it's just right, and he was smart enough to figure it out for himself. I think Mencius is drawing from this tradition, drawing from this insight. Remember how he urges the king to not pursue money and power in a way that encourages the people to squabble for money and power. We succeed by Wu Wei, which you can translate in action, but a better translation might be a bit different. It refers to minimal action, natural action. So we live our lives striving and straining for things. Taoism tells us that action is necessary sometimes. In section 30, there's even military action. You can even have a government doing violence, to I don't know. I'd have to check the text. Military action is, I think, condoned by, so at least in certain circumstances, properly. So it doesn't mean you never do anything. Wu Wei doesn't mean sit down and do nothing ever again. It means practice minimal and natural action that works with the patterns of life, not against them. How to characterize Wu Wei? Inaction is not quite right. It means don't live your whole life striving and straining and wearing yourself out to get rich. It means curb your desires and learn the patterns of life that work with the flow of life, the flow of nature, the flow of Tao rather than against it. Use them. Mere inaction is not right. Minimal action, natural action is a little better. Wu Wei is a strategy for living life that does not fight against natural processes, but looks for ways they can be helpful. Now, this can be a personal ethic. It connects as a personal ethic to the reduction of desire. If you want to be happy, we should stop trying so hard to be happy in the conventional ways by constantly pursuing money, power, fame, physical pleasures. It connects to a political ethic. It's this philosophy of minimal government. People will compare Daoism to laissez-faire capitalism or classical liberalism, the Western, maybe I should just say the modern tradition of economic thinking. Adam Smith, Hayek, and so on. There are connections here. This is a philosophy of minimal government. That's one way to understand Wu Wei. So Wu Wei is this weird concept that's not always easy to characterize. It could be translated inaction, which might seem weird. It's better to think of it, I think, as minimal natural action, which connects to the reduction of desire in your own life and connects to a philosophy of minimal government action in political theory. Terrific explanation of Wu Wei, or illustration of Wu Wei. The second link on YouTube. Hold on time. The second link on YouTube from your notes is strongly recommended. I watched this on the coast of Mombasa in 2001 or so. If you have a sailboat, you could fight against the wind. Your sail would be useless. You could row with oars and try to go against the wind. It would be very difficult. But you can actually take a sailboat, move the sails one way, move the sails another way, adjust the rudder, and you can steer a sailboat one way or the other way or this way or even that way, even if the wind is coming from that way. So if the shore is over there and the wind is coming from over there, the wind is going towards the shore, you can steer your boat that way, perpendicular to the wind, or that way, perpendicular to the wind. And you can even make it go against the wind. Not directly. That's impossible. That would be fighting the wind. But if you ride the wind carefully, cleverly, you can make the boat go a little bit against the wind and a little bit against the wind in the other direction and zigzag your way against the wind. You can go against the wind in a sailboat by riding the wind. This is Wu Wei, minimal and natural action. And I think it works really well. And I've had interesting occasions to apply this in my own life, talking to the kids. Great example. One kid, what was he at the time? 4 years old. Let's say 4 and 2, probably. I think that's how it was. The 4-year-old has this little red bicycle. They call it a balance bike. There's no pedals. He doesn't ride it with pedals. He just pushes it with his feet and learns to balance on it. And he was old enough that he didn't need it quite as much. And the 2-year-old younger brother was old enough that he really likes it. And so 4-year-old who actually owns the bike thinks it's his turn with the red bicycle. His little brother's had it long enough. And his little brother is going around in a big circle around the podium area of where we live. And the older brother, 4 years old, wants his bicycle back. He thinks it's his turn. The other kids had it long enough. So what does he do? He goes directly towards the bicycle. He chases the bicycle. He chases the little brother. So his 2-year-old brother is going around fast on a bicycle in a big circle. And the older brother, 4 years old, is chasing him. And he's chasing him and he's whining, it's my turn, stop, come back with my bicycle. And what do? Well, maybe nothing for the moment, Wu Wei. But eventually when I realize I need to intervene, or when the older brother, the 4-year-old, complains, Daddy, give me the bike. What do? Do I get up and chase him around a circle because I can run faster? No. No. I practice Wu Wei. I do absolutely nothing until the 2-year-old on the bicycle finishes going around a circle one time, gets to where I am, and then, with minimal action, I can get what I need. I can make him stop. I can tell him, stop! Bring it over here. Come here. Maybe I don't even have to use words, but certainly I don't have to chase him and wear myself out chasing this little kid on a bicycle in a circle. It's a circle. He's going in a circle. I just stay in the same place. He will come to me. And the 4-year-old, if he would just stay in the same place, wouldn't have to chase his little brother. Okay, so Wu Wei can be surprisingly practical if you follow it properly. Look for these opportunities. You may find opportunities to practice minimal and natural action that saves some unnecessary labor. All right, Buddhism. We probably have long enough notes, and I'm minimally an expert, not an expert at all, rather. Incidentally, if you want to study these things more, obviously read the text, study the notes, do some more readings. Read other Taoist philosophers, read the whole Daodejing and not just our short readings. Read it in the original language, read other texts in Buddhism. And if you want experts to teach you things, find the experts in Taoism and Buddhism and in Confucianism and so on in the religion philosophy department here at HKBU. For that matter, Kant, I'm not an expert in Kant, but we got us a Kant expert. But here are my brief notes introducing Buddhism. Some of this is thoroughly old news to you, perhaps. Others might be new. The Buddha himself, Siddhartha Gautama, founder of Buddhism, according to the legends, he's a prince who abandoned his life of luxury and became a wandering seeker of wisdom. He attained enlightenment when he realized the origins of suffering. He realizes that suffering comes from desire. According to legend, this happened under a Ficus religiosa tree, or a sacred fig tree, or a peepal tree. I think I have seen these in Hong Kong. Yeah, I've seen peepal trees here. So that's always fun. I believe in India, the tree itself is lost, but a direct descendant of the tree, I think, is still living, and you can go visit it. Early Buddhism retained the basic cosmic picture of Hinduism. This involves transmigration of souls, or what we call reincarnation. That's the word we usually use for it. And samsara. Let's see, samsara. According to the old Hindu picture, we go through many lives. There's reincarnation. You live, you die, you get a new body, you get a new life, you're born a different time, a different mother, you live, you die, etc. And the goal is to eventually stop this endless cycle. The cycle is called samsara, and it's the cycle of endless birth, death, rebirth. And the goal in Hinduism is to stop this endless cycle and return to oneness with God. And Buddhism retains this basic picture, only the cycle doesn't end when you achieve oneness with God by realizing that God and you are one, all reality is one. Classical Hinduism is pantheism, or at least a normal, one of the major strands of Hinduism. Hinduism is complex. One major strand of classical Hinduism is pantheistic. Buddhism is a bit different. It takes this basic idea of reincarnation and samsara and says, actually, the cycle ends when you achieve nirvana, which is the state of enlightenment and peace, which happens when you're free from desire. So I've probably already given you my mini lecture on desire. Buddhism is one of those traditions that recognizes that we humans are not as happy as we'd like to be because we have unsatisfied desires. How do you fix that? Well, you can try to beat the world into submission and make it satisfy our desires using politics or using science. This is the approach of Machiavelli with politics, of Marx with politics, of John Locke with politics. This is the approach of Descartes and Francis Bacon with science. This is an emphasis in modern Enlightenment European philosophy. In older traditions, in Buddhism, Stoicism, Epicureanism, Christian medieval philosophy, Hinduism's the Bhagavad Gita, in all these traditions, the idea is to change desire. Some of these traditions try to redirect desire towards God, who will satisfy. Other traditions say, no, the problem is just desire. Just get rid of it or reduce it. So Buddhism is a magnificent example of this approach. Buddhism tries to help us reduce our desires. Now, it teaches what we call the middle path, the way of moderation. It is divided into the Theravada and the Mahayana traditions. Now, if you were to state that that Christianity is divided into Protestantism and Catholicism, you'd be largely correct, but oversimplifying things dramatically. There's other traditions. I believe Thailand is mostly Theravada Buddhism. Chinese Buddhism is mostly Mahayana. The Dalai Lama is a Mahayana Buddhist. The goal of a Theravada Buddhist is merely to achieve enlightenment and pass on over into nirvana. The Mahayana Buddhists are different because they believe in, here's a technical term if you don't already know it, the Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva is someone who has achieved enlightenment but does not pass on over into nirvana in order to help others. The Dalai Lama is such a person according to Tibetan Buddhism. I think I interrupted myself and didn't finish my analogy to Christianity. In Christianity, there's Protestantism, there's Catholicism, yeah, but there's also Greek Orthodoxy, Russian Orthodoxy, Armenian Orthodoxy, Ethiopian Orthodoxy, and the Mar Thoma Church in India, and I'm not even being thorough. I think something like this is true as well in Buddhism. It's not just Theravada Mahayana. There are subdivisions within these traditions, and I think there may be other traditions as well. Those are just two of the big ones. It's not false, but it might be a bit of an oversimplification. Anyway, moving on towards finishing this video and getting to the other major points of Buddhism. If the goal is to reorder desire to achieve happiness, how do we do that? Well, there are four noble truths. And I'm complimenting my world religions teacher, Dr. Matos from Dallas Baptist. I copied some of his notes here. Suffering is a universal fact. Suffering begins with desire. The cessation of suffering happens when you eliminate that desire. How do you eliminate desire? By following the path of Buddhism, which is the Noble Eightfold Path. With compliments again to Dr. Matos, the Noble Eightfold Path involves the right view of life. Realize that life is impermanent. You're going to die. Everything you care about is going to disappear. It's going to fall apart. It's going to collapse. Expect complete destruction of everything you love. I may be exaggerating a bit, but maybe not. Things die. Nothing's forever. Recognize the impermanence of life. Learn to have pure thoughts and motives, right-mindedness, and right speech. Be kind. Be honest. Right action. Avoid harm. Right livelihood. Be involved in a job that doesn't do any harm. Strive always to improve with moderation. That's right effort. Then there's right mindfulness and right concentration. Meditate to contemplate the nature of reality and cultivate states of inner peace. This mindfulness thing is a big deal these days. Mindfulness sort of got popular. There may be some influence of Hollywood here. Mindfulness involves largely paying attention to what you're doing, what you're wanting, and why. Understand why you do the things you do. And keep in mind, this is significant for other reasons. We've already discussed this. Remember when we looked at psychology and happiness, we found some insights in Jeffrey Schwartz. Anyway, I'm done for this video.